This is Duke University.
Gary, are you there?
I am, Greg. How you doing?
Yeah, very good. We just got to make it a bit louder so we can hear in the auditorium. What website would you like me to pull up?
Sure. I would say I'd like you to pull up two websites. There's two things I'd like us to go through quickly before we take questions. One is greenrankings.newsweek.com.
Okay, I've got that. Yeah.
Yep. The other is unpri.org.
Okay, we've got that. So we're just right now running through the generation investment case, which looks at the investment in ABB India, kind of weighing up dirty power generation versus access to energy for the poor. In the 10 minutes with you on the line, firstly, could you describe what your role is and what TrueCost does? Talk a little bit about how investors have asked you to look at portfolios and look at carbon intensity and so on, and particularly if you pick up anything around emerging markets. And then finally, if you could close with green the green rankings. And then I'll ask two students to pose questions to you. Okay, we should be done and dusted in 15 minutes, and you can be on your way.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Hello everybody. I'm Vice President North America for TrueCost. Was the first full-time person for what is a UK-based company that's been around for 10 years now. And so I'm here building relationships for the organization amongst numerous other things. I also teach at Columbia and University of Maryland Smith School of Business, Sustainability and Investing. It's great to be with you. What TrueCost does, we are I believe we're the only ones who have a comprehensive database on the environmental impacts of the world's largest businesses. And we're actually tracking now for up to 8 years comprehensively over 700 environmental impacts across scopes 1, 2, and 3, direct operations, purchased electricity, and the supply chain of these companies across all sectors, all regions globally. We do that by deploying an input-output model of our own design that's very specific on an industry level. We break down what companies do granularly to 464 categories of business activity. Over time, we've gotten to understand the benchmark impacts of each of these business activities, and that gives us a great starting point at understanding these environmental impacts per company. We then look at public disclosure. We're very close allies now of the Carbon Disclosure Project, but we only use that data when it seems to be right. Carbon Disclosure Project does a fantastic job of raising awareness and encouraging disclosure, but they don't actually check the data, and it's kind of all over the place, apples and oranges. So, one actually needs to scrub this information quite carefully, and we do that. So we'll also use information that companies might publish at their websites or in a sustainability report, layered in to our model data as a starting point. We then share that information with the companies we track, and so to a growing extent, our data is informed directly by company feedback, which is a critical part of our process. So at the end of the day, we have a comprehensive database of all of these impacts on the companies we track globally. We actually have a partnership with the IFC as it pertains to the developing world. We now have data, comprehensive data on well over 1,000 companies, including China, Russia, Brazil, certainly India as well. And that means our database is very much global. It very much includes the largest companies in the world by country. And in a world where information on Chinese companies and other countries is quite hard to come by, we at least have this basic understanding on a benchmark basis of what their impacts are, more or less. And obviously there's a disclosure issue that's still being fleshed out in this regard. We're looking quantitatively at these impacts. We stand arm's length from our data, and by doing that, that allows us to do a whole variety of things. We work with investors who are interested in investing in a low-carbon fashion. So that IFC partnership I mentioned it allowed for the creation of an index using the S&P Mid and Large Cap Emerging Markets Index as a benchmark. But the idea is to maintain the sector weightings in the benchmark, but reward the lower carbon intensity companies. And as a result, you end up with a fairly close correlation on performance going back in time, but with a much lower carbon footprint. And so as we move towards a world where these things are starting to be considered in for pricing considerations, there's an extra layer of protection. And also low carbon is becoming a proxy for how well companies are run, how innovative our companies are becoming. And that's, of course, what we're also participating in with the Newsweek Green Rankings. So our data is a key input into those rankings that you have there at greenrankings.newsweek.com. After class, if you want to visit that website, some of you may have already done so. You can see that not only the largest 500 U.S. companies have been measured for 2 years running now, also the largest 100 global companies. The rankings are 45% our data, which looks at these quantitative impacts on a relative basis, using revenue as a normalizing factor. One can use different normalizing factors to compare and contrast the relative efficiency of companies in different sectors and regions. We use revenue in the absence of one normalizing factor that works well across the board. But this allows for a comparative to be placed globally on this information. We also are rewarding companies for quality material impacts disclosure for the first time this year. That was a slight improvement in the methodology versus the first iteration. Another 45% of the score comes from what used to be KLD, what's now part of MSCI, and their qualitative assessment of these companies' policies and procedures. And another 10% came from a fairly sophisticated survey performed by the corporateregister.com, a survey of leading CEOs and others who are informed. And so if you click on the survey results, you'd actually see the companies that scored well are the ones that you would have expected to see. The IBMs, the P&Gs, the ones that are actually innovating, the GEs, the Walmarts. And so it was quite a quality piece of work unto itself. There's a leading panel of advisors on the Newsweek rankings process, including Dan Esty, Tom Murray of EDF, David Vidal of Conference Board. So this has been a very rewarding process, and these rankings have quickly become something quite credible in a world that's looking for quality data on sustainability, which is, of course, a major challenge and continues to, in some ways, lack. And quite happy to take your questions on that. Just one other thing I'd like to quickly point out is that at the second website, unpri.org, by having the comprehensive data that we have, we're able to produce reports such as we did for UNPRI and presented at the PRI in-person event in San Francisco a few weeks ago. It's freely available for you to download, as is years of research at our website, truecost.com. We looked at the entirety of the environmental damage coming from all human activity in 2008, which we approximate at $6.6 trillion US dollars. And it looks like the world's largest 3,000 companies accounted for somewhere around a third of that. And if you include all corporate activity, probably more like 40% or so. So just under half of the entirety of environmental damage comes from corporate activity. So if this is where the largest opportunities are. And of course, the supply chain becomes extremely important because Scope 3 can be the majority of the footprint of many sectors. So that's, to a large extent, what we're seeing is companies focusing more and more on their supply chains, using that as a leverage, using that as a place they can find real savings, and we're quite encouraged to see that. And to some degree, the question is, there is now a sustainability imperative for companies. There's no question about that. We have conversations with them all the time. They're taking this quite seriously here in the States. Why has it not become an imperative as much for investors? That's just probably a matter of time. That's actually the subject of our next book, and I look forward to taking your questions.
That's excellent. Thanks, Carrie. I've got two questions coming up from the audience of students.
I have a question.
Only one from the side. So let me kick off with the first question. In our case situation generation, I'm not sure, have you used that case to teach at Columbia?
I'm actually going to, but I haven't yet. I'm certainly familiar with it.
Okay.
I haven't read the case yet. Sorry about that.
No worries. So just the direct issue is you're faced with the situation. You think you have good data on the CO2 footprint of an India-based unit of ABB, but they will use coal-fired generation to create electricity. The two pieces. One is, are you sure, or how would you be sure about the data, the quality of data, scope 1, 2, or 3, around a power generation plant in emerging markets? So how do you kind of tackle the data analysis quality problem? And related to that, how have your clients thought through how do we balance this issue of CO2 footprint versus providing to societal need, like basically electricity? And then I've got two students who are going to ask questions that you just want to answer in like 60, 120 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. So the answer to the first part, certainly there are firms on the ground doing auditing, there's a whole litany of such. Our approach at True Cost is very much we start with the 37,000-foot view of the organizational footprints as best as we can ascertain them. We know we're getting quite close and are quite in the ballpark. The UN report I mentioned correlates with the Stern report. The environmental damage is about 11% of GDP. That's very much what the Stern report saw. So, from a macro standpoint, we're quite confident where we are, our ability to understand these benchmark impacts per granular industry category and per company. Obviously, if you're looking to understand the granular impacts of a particular facility, a particular power plant, you need to understand what technologies are deployed, are they scrubbing? There's a whole litany of things that can be done when you have the ability to visit a facility, and so obviously it's the on-the-ground auditing that then kicks in as the best way of assuring the actual footprint of the operation. There are these different tiers that one can drill down. We certainly start with a core of information that's at this sort of 37,000-foot level. We're quite aware that one can, and we do assist at times in this further drill down on scope 1 and 2. So that's the first part. Second part, certainly well aware, and it's very important to state that we're completely non-judgmental about our data. It's quantitative. It's there's no value judgment placed on this information. We're just trying to calculate these metrics. Well aware that, for example, in the state of Indiana, they have the lowest energy costs in the country, and that's because 97% of their electricity is sourced from coal. It's quite important to be considering all aspects of sustainability in a consideration of whether to invest in a company. And just because they use coal or an organization uses coal, it shouldn't be an automatic disqualifying factor.
Great. Thanks. So two questions. If you introduce yourself and pose a question.
Hi, Carrie. My name is Kareem Melville. I'm a second-year dual degree at Duke, the Fuqua School of Business and the Nicholas School of the Environment. My question is, since you kind of are intimately familiar with these rankings and we're looking at investing, for those companies that are publicly traded, has there been any analysis around, when the ranking moves up or down, fluctuation in the stock price of that company, and to what extent these rankings really affect the market cap and the valuation of these firms?
Thanks for that question. It's probably too early for that to have occurred, but what has happened is that there is just a litany of rankings out there. Companies are barraged by questionnaires, surveys, requests for information, requests to pay for information as well, which is something we don't do about a company's own footprint. The first year the Newsweek rankings came out, companies by and large were waiting to see how relevant they might be. We didn't get a lot of conversation going beforehand. once they came out, they emerged as credible, and they quickly rose to the top of folks' attention in the corporate world. Once they came out a second time, it's been even more intense. The Newsweek rankings are mentioned more and more as one of the most credible rankings of their kind. Corporates are quite taken by them by and large, and quite keen on how they compare themselves to their peers. The number of large cap companies who are quite keen on how they rank one against the other, say FedEx and UPS, Coke and Pepsi, on and on. The CEO is asking their sustainability folks for a 20 to 30 minute debrief on what do these rankings mean. If this becomes actionable, this becomes something companies are measuring themselves against, and so it becomes a baseline that companies can use to help determine their strategic futures. I think it's too early to say that share prices have moved due to these rankings, although what I will say is that over the first year, the top 100 of the Newsweek rankings outperformed the S&P 500 by 6.4%. So we do think that's quite an investable concept, and one that in future may well cause share price movement.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. And the next question.
Yeah, hi, Carrie. My name is Wiley Hodgson. I'm also a dual degree student between the Fuqua School and the Nicholas School. And you kind of answered part of my question when you responded to Graham's question, but I was wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail on how you mentioned the CDP database is a great public access tool for a lot of folks. Like I was working with it this past summer with a pretty large corporation. I was doing a carbon footprint analysis for them. But as you said, a lot of that data between suppliers, it's not, it's apples and oranges. And you said your company's able to kind of clean that data up. And I was wondering if you might be able to go into some of those specifics on what your approach is to really kind of normalize that data.
No, thanks for that. It's very important to have direct hands-on experience when working with this information. The conversations with the companies couldn't be more important. There are those who think that some of this data will be commoditized at one point. And that might make sense on some levels. But then you start to realize that you actually need to look in depth at this information and understand, does it really reflect the entirety of a global operation, or is it just information that was disclosed to satisfy a local regulation, therefore is local only? Or was the data disclosed on a normalized basis? Then you have to denormalize it. We track 9 separate greenhouse gas emissions. And so if data is provided in CO2 equivalent only, how do you actually extrapolate that and make it usable? So we have ongoing conversations with large financial services companies who have an oil and gas company on their balance sheet. So we have to factor that in to their consideration. As if they disclose information without that oil and gas company, then we need to have a dialogue with those companies. So it's quite important to get into the data, get your hands dirty, and make sure the information is valid, and there are different issues on a sector-by-sector basis.
Thanks, Carrie. It's been great to have you feed directly into the class like this. You teach, you know how helpful it is getting input directly from the field, so to speak. Literally, in your case, I'm not sure where you pulled over. I hope you're safe. But happy driving up to Canada, and we'll catch up on the phone. And on behalf of the students, let me say thank you so much for your insights.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Graham. Great to be here.
Okay, thanks, Karen.
Cheers, Bennett.
Alrighty, done and done. Okay, so quick reflections on that input. Anything you learned that was new or interesting?
I thought it was really interesting at the end when you talked about the top 10% or top 100 companies where it was outperforming the S&P. It'd be interesting to see
what
how the
didn't
rest
he
of the
say?
companies did.
What didn't he say?
What the bottom 10%?
No. About that statement. Because I saw a whole lot of people like semi-excited. You notice I haven't talked about performance much at all.
He didn't say if those were just like the top 50 companies on the list.
What's the difference between causation and correlation?
Right.
That's going to be the #1 question you get asked after this class, after the seminar. Yeah. If we got 6 months to work on it, I'll map it out. You guys can do some studies. We can crunch some numbers. There's studies, so net. There's studies that show outperformance, and studies that show underperformance, and a whole bunch in the middle that just say there's so much else going on, so much other noise, we can't find it. So at that level of like general cocktail party conversation, what I'm very happy saying is, no, integrating ESG factors does not cause underperformance. Happy with that statement. You won't hear me at a cocktail party saying it causes underperformance. I'm not happy saying it. But you can see he was ready to answer that question. And from a marketing point of view, hell yeah. You know, if you're selling Generation Investment Management Fund, you reach for the biggest number you can find and you slap it down on the table. Other reflections on that input?
That they ended their analysis once the product leaves the company, and so that it's not looking at like a life cycle analysis. We were talking about how all the top companies were tech companies, but you know what's happening to all the batteries and all the e-waste that happens there.
And I haven't looked at the article. I was just I pinged it earlier. I just didn't get to it. But they got something about the cleanest batteries. So obviously there's some kind of conversation. If you go onto that green ranking 500, there's an article. I'll read it on the plane, what have you. But that issue is definitely coming up. How to do that. Yeah. Any other reactions from this side of the room?
I don't know if that's relevant, but I'm just looking at the Dow Jones Sustainability Index.
Yes.
I'm wondering whether portfolio managers tend to use that ranking more so than rankings.
Sure. So yeah, it's relevant. I mean, when I have the longer version of the seminar, we talk about ratings and rankings and how to build them and pros and cons. In the field currently, what I'm hearing from most people is that they don't use one of the ESG specialty indices as a benchmark for their performance. So, for example, in the case, okay, so go away, find it, anyone. In the case, find out how do they measure performance. Okay. So what I'm picking up in the field is that funds want to be measured on cash plus performance, outperformance versus inflation, equity, and so on. It is a benchmark. So one of the most intriguing situations for me, and I encourage you to go Google Shell Dow Jones Sustainability Index and 2010 and see what you get. Shell started to benchmark this performance of senior executives and senior management to how the company ranks on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. Okay, so kind of like an interesting, different idea. And what are you trying to do? You're trying to make it direct. Yeah, so you're trying to integrate sustainability with your day job. It's not two separate pieces. You're trying to integrate. Problem: no one role played at Shell. What happens if you get dropped on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index? Fast forward to 2010. Your reaction: very bad PR moment. Where you now this. That's a great American word, right? We now this Dow Jones Sustainability Index is saying it's too personal and qualitative. So there's a number of specialty indexes out there. I mean, we're building one right now in Turkey with the Istanbul Stock Exchange. The goal of the Turkish authorities is to highlight, as an emerging market, how important Turkey is, strategically, culturally, economically. It's got 330 different securities listed on the stock exchange. It's got kind of top 40, which are their blue chips. But by developing a sustainability index, they're trying to send messages around how attractive Turkey is as an investment destination to buy into the stock exchange. But also they're trying to create kind of a leadership group and drive sustainability issues in Turkey itself. So the actual, for me, what's fascinating is why these indexes get built and what the impact is. And actually to date, there's been some studies around stock exchange performance, if you get in and out of the index just in general, and there's been a very small bit about ESG, but there's currently a paper funded by the IFC that Cinco chose not to do. I think it's being done by SD Partners out of Yale, where they are looking at the business proposition for building ESG indexes. So should we build another ranking or index, to Carrie's point? On the analyst side, from my time at KLD, I can tell you, you'd have a 2-minute conversation if a company went up in the ranking. If they went down in the ranking, you were in for a 1-hour bollocking, and you may actually have a site visit from someone who heads up sustainability or their C-level suite, or even their IR. So it's one of those kind of classic risk sensitivity issues. Has anyone here been involved in completing forms that went into one of these ESG specialty indexes or rankings? Did anyone ever get involved? I guess in doing that CDP footprint, you would be involved with.
I was looking at actual CDP reports. I wasn't actually writing one up for our company.
Oh,
Trying to get a better idea of what.
They didn't let you near this, the good stuff.
No, I was the mid.
Hey, come on. You're not just an intern. Come on. Hey. Okay, back to the case. Right, we've got our decision points. Right, we've got people that have their opinions. I need some people who would not invest in the fund and why. Go.
I wouldn't, because I just focus more on the environmental side, and I can't be putting my money towards some of those coal burning plants for up and out apartment for 40 years. So if they're having this debate, I can't. That's fine.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I would want people behind making these decisions to be more informed about energy themselves instead of having the scientists do the documentation. I would rather have like a focused group that was focused on industry
Like an
analysis.
energy fund.
An energy fund. What?
What I'm hearing from you is specialization.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
So you don't want a fund that invests in different areas. You want energy fund with specialists who build power plants and know how to analyze them.
Right.
That's a reason not why not to invest, okay? Who else? Who would choose not to invest in the fund?
I wouldn't, because I don't think it supports the long-term view, the idea of climate change versus poverty. I don't think climate change affects the poor the most. So in the long term, if you have these regions that are producing coal and emitting so much CO2 and having these dirty industries there, they're not gonna alleviate poverty.
Can we pick that up? Let's differentiate, and I need MEMs to be front and center on this, right? Let's differentiate between mitigation and adaptation. Yeah? You heard Bill talking with the strategy. Okay? He says he looks at both. What I'd love to do with him, and maybe some work we can do together, how could we build filters, one for mitigation and one for adaptation, and effectively track impact or performance? But let's talk a bit about this fund. We're at the fund level. We haven't looked at the investment decision for ADB. And I'm trying to keep the two separate. We're just saying, would you put your hard-earned money in this fund? Yeah? If you're a pension fund trustee, would you allow your pension fund members to invest in this fund? So let's talk a bit about this fund, and picking up on this point here. How does this fund deal with issues around mitigation and adaptation? Do you see it described in the investment policy? Do you see it? Do you see how the investment committee works through that issue? Is it clear to you?
It seems like they kind of use this framework a little bit.
You're pointing to which exhibit now?
Exhibit 5B.
Yes. Which describes what?
Which basically, assessing a sustainability means impact. So it's kind of vague exactly what that means, I think. Basically, taking into consideration government, physical, scientific, and then add it to things. So I would assume that they would consider it in there. So there's more factors.
Okay.
I mean, exactly. This is the part that comes to me, like bottom line impact plus or minus operating costs, plus or minus revenue, plus or minus capex. Like it says nothing about how they get to that, which I would imagine that's because they make their money and their adjustments.
There's going to be a black box.
Yeah,
right?
of course. But I mean, I would assume that they use some part of that framework.
And how many million do you think you'd have to be investing in this fund before that would be a black box?
Oh, I can't imagine it ever, unless I was John Doe or Al Gore.
What 3 ways are there to invest in this fund? Very important. 3 steps to asset management. It's not an investment class unless you understand how the investment industry works. So effectively, it's a startup from scratch. White piece of paper that someone said earlier. They didn't buy sand. How do you invest into this fund? How can you tell me you don't want to invest into it, or you do want to invest into it, but you don't know what you're investing into? It's in the case. This is where you read.
Australian
Go.
investment.
Justin. Loud.
Australian investment manager, a Finnish insurance company, or a Swiss private bank.
Okay.
If you're
So
small-
why? Why? Explain what's going on.
So those are specifically for small investors that don't have, let's say, 30 million to invest. So
Can we call them small, medium, or large investors? Okay. Okay. Yeah? So if you are a retail investor, like any of us, unless you've got 30 bar, in which case you don't raise your hand in class. Okay. Keep it on the down one. So we're going to go into what 3 vehicles?
an investment manager, a bank, or an insurance company.
And what's with the geographic thing? You said they were from where?
Australia, Finland, or Switzerland.
Huh. Are we sitting here in North Carolina? Can you invest in this fund? I don't know. What does the case tell us? Is investment a highly or low regulated industry? Yes. You try and invest in Cayman Islands. Yeah? So what I'm trying to make investment as just like any other industry, right? Just use your MBA hats. It's a startup, they're looking for capital. Step 1, gather assets. You got nothing. What is the first money that went into the fund and how long was it there for? What is the first money? What turned it from a paper portfolio on Google Finance to a real living thing? Now then.
Founders equity?
Right. So step 1, when creating an asset management company, what do you need? How do you make a small fortune in the wine industry? Start with a large one. So step 1, have wealthy friends, families, and your own cash. Yeah? Prove your proposition, then people follow you. Critical. Insight into the investment management industry. Step 1, sustainable investment. I don't care what your proposition is, let's show me how you can trade. See if you got decent compliance, and how we're going to invest into this fund. So he went to, you said Finland, Switzerland, and Australia. Strange. What's going on?
Potentially the regulatory requirements in each of those countries are unique.
What else?
Probably the regulatory climate in those countries, they just have less regulations, so it's easier to raise money.
Really? Switzerland's got less.
I don't know.
Finland? Australia?
It's proving you can do business in different markets. You can get capital from local sources.
Okay.
Or maybe the rich Americans have money parked in Swiss bank accounts.
now we're talking like a businessman. Okay, what else?
I didn't read the case, but
okay.
But
you'd like to opine. Go ahead. 30 seconds.
I'm speculating that the target market is in these regions.
Good. Are you doing an MBA?
Yes, I'm starting.
Okay, the person who hasn't started the MBA gives me the best MBA quality answer other than yours, Nima. Right? No, come on, it's business. Rule 1, gather assets. Where are you going to gather assets? What are the drivers and barriers? You've all done a survey, analysis. What is your appetite? What is your opinion? They're launching in Switzerland, Australia, and Finland. Why? They've both got developed investment markets, great. They got people with disposable income to invest. And oh, by the way, when they presented their proposition, standing on a box in the middle of somewhere, someone said, okay, and let's build it. And they needed to work with local institutional partners who could wrap it into something. So in Switzerland, they wrapped it with a large private bank that didn't have an offering in this space, by the way, so they could roll that out. They went to Australia because it's one of the largest retirement funds markets in the world, with a lot of defined contribution funds, and they've got a great sensitivity to ESG issues. Why? Because they had a 7-year drought, so it was excellent timing straight after your movie comes out to go and market there. MBA 101. Investment management, sustainable investment management 101. So that gives us our entry points. Who's decided to go into this fund and why? Okay, only 3 people were brave enough to say they're not going in. The rest of you aren't saving, are you going to do it on your credit card? Go.
I mean, I would go in with a caveat that I'm not looking to maximize returns, but have an environmental goal as well. I believe coal investment is important because while the share of renewables and everything else will grow in the future,
yes,
coal will remain a very critical source of energy going forward.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. It all depends on when. Like, if you ask me today to go into it, I wouldn't, just because they focus on long term, and I want short term returns just because I'm young and I want to do things. But just the fact that they actually take time. Even though they have disagreements, they take 2 weeks off just to reassess themselves. It shows that they're really adhering to their ethics and for that reason, and just because I agree with their ethics, I would invest, but later in life.
Okay, thank you.
I would invest because, I mean, if we're talking about my 401k or whatever, I mean, that's really long term, and I'm not really expecting, a lot of the fluctuations are gonna happen, I kind of want a lower risk one. I mean, kind of counter, I mean, if I'm looking at my short term ones, that's gonna be my own money for my 401k, it's like, okay, I'm not gonna monitor it that much, so if this one's fine, and it's impact investing, so it's, I'm accepting probably lower returns, but I know it's for an impact, so.
I was agreeing with you until you hit that last comment. But yeah, no, what you've hit on is exactly the client match that we're trying to find in the asset management industry. Step one, no financial advisor should take your assets, do anything with it, unless they understand your time horizon. There's only 2 times that it matters what the market valuation of the company is. Yeah, the rest, it doesn't really matter. Right? Which is why Warren Buffett could have bought how much of BP if he was in a good mood earlier this year. Yeah? There's only 2 prices. So it's got to match to your time horizon. That's why it's so critical. That's why we brought it up around the investment process. That's a critical issue you've got to drill down into. And it also raises a flag in terms of how they go about making this decision, for me, a correction, how they went about making another decision in this case that they reference as a good example. Okay, who else went in and why?
I would go in just because, well, the funny answer is because ESG matters today, and if we don't care about it, the world is going to end. So I'm not going to make any money no matter what I'm speculating. But, you know, just based on...
So the world ends, and that's your funny answer? Go on.
And basically, I would go in because I really like their philosophy. And even though people mention long terms, the average holding period is 2 years. That's not exactly long term. So they are concerned with the returns, and I'm pretty sure I would be able to make money.
Okay. You going in? Yes? And why?
Their first value proposition was to outperform the market.
Okay, and?
So regardless of your time horizon, I think if they indeed are able to do that, it's a good investment. But I also agree with their philosophy, which is if you combine those two, then I'm a winner.
As people contributing your own good hard-earned money, right? Okay, here's the situation. If you're a pension fund trustee, right, you got what's called fiduciary duties. There's something in America called the Prudent Investing Guidelines. Right? Up until the mid-90s, you were basically semi-exposed as an investor if you basically didn't put it in a bank where it's super safe and just get the returns. So on the back of modern portfolio theory, which suggests you need to diversify your assets as well as some other items, there was legislation in the US that described what a prudent investor can do, the so-called prudent investor rule. Yeah? So you were, for the first time, really had your legal basis that said when you invest, you can look at all these issues. You don't just have to put it in a bank where it's rock solid and just get some kind of tiny dividend, tiny coupon return. So if you're in a situation here with this fund, you need to be thinking about what is the return horizon, and when you're thinking about investing the money, think also for the widow and the orphan. That's kind of your classic trustee type situation, right? Or the pension fund member who's got 40 years to invest. You need to interrogate this fund and make sure you understand why they do things and why they don't do things. That's why, do you guys remember the mutual fund pricing issue? Anyone was in the business a couple of years ago?
Yeah, was that the Janus, the timing?
Yes. Well, what do you remember?
I don't remember much other than they were trading at night heavily to take advantage of timing.
Sure. So what happens with mutual funds, and this is a reason why ETFs kicked off, okay? ETFs, go ahead.
And does it have to do with the management fees?
So again?
Does it have to do with the management fees?
It was the pricing of the units. Do you remember?
I mean, I don't remember the case specifically, but I know that ETFs are preferred because there's less of a management fee. And
sure, so that can be one issue, but in this particular issue, it was like 04, 05, I may misspeak now. Janus was involved, Putnam was involved. Basically, Putnam's sponsorship of NPR's marketplace.org, it's funded them for 4 or 5 years. That's guilt money, okay? On account of they were caught out backing their best customers by giving them a better price, because there's a level of discretion about how you price units. Yeah? And there's a certain time at which you close off and say, this was the price for the units. Any units bought or sold during the day or during a period will get booked at this price. And what they're offering is there was a small window where they could wiggle for their best clients that they would give them a slightly different price, preferential terms. Yeah? Like it's mind-blowing. It's like Bernie Madoff quality. It's like, insiders messing with your money. So, fortunately, regulation, I can't recall if a whistleblower spotted it. I don't remember kind of how it cracked. But anyway, when you're thinking about these funds, you've got to be thinking about what is the investment policy for the fund, what is in the proxy statements, what is in the prospectus that they give you as investors. So the critical questions you're asking are, does it match me, my investment horizon, my risk appetite, and are they doing what they say they do? Yeah? So I would, again, I don't promote anything, but when I look at this, and they won't show me what's in the black box, of course, but those are some of the issues that you're looking to answer for, right? When you're trying to make the decision about where to invest. And then there's, of course, the practical decisions. Can you actually invest in this vehicle? Or most funds at an institutional level, the consultants won't touch them until they've got 3 years investment performance history. On the downside is, if it's a manager with capacity constraints, and yes, at a certain point in time, and even in listed equities, as an active manager, there's only so much money you can manage, yeah? Because then you kind of max out, there's too much money to move around, and especially depending on some of the markets you're in. Okay, so that we've dealt with, I think, with the fund. Any other comments on the fund? Let's go to the investment decision itself then. So could I have opinions on why Generation Investment Management, led by young David, should present to the investment committee and recommend a buy on ABB India? Again, let me remind you, the doors are locked. You have to choose. You can't get voted off the island. I just need a reasonable MBA quality thought process and facts from the case to back you.
So I would go ahead with it. The reason is climate change is a global issue. And so the way I think of it, if we don't invest in this factory, then someone else is going to. If that presumption is not correct, then I'd back out of it. But if someone else is going to, why not you put your money into it and then advocate for more energy efficient technology within the factory? Because if it's going to get built, it's going to get built. And if you're worried about the climate change issue, it's going to happen anyway, whether your hand is in it or not. And climate change affects everybody. So with that logic, I would invest.
Okay, I hear your argument. Okay.
I would say that
So
actually
in or out?
so actually what I would say is I'm not out, but I would want more due diligence because
That's
we don't
not an
know,
option. It's
no,
gonna
we don't
be
know anything
buy.
about the managers of the actual company, and a lot of investment has to do with the actual people that are involved. So we don't know if they, are they corrupt or are they leaving the company? What are their impacts into the company?
We've done
What
all
are
that.
their-
We've done all that.
You already
It's
know that
ABB
they're-
India. It checks out.
All right, and then the other thing is this financial information is pretty weak. I mean, you just know the profits. You don't really know how is it really broken down.
Okay.
So I mean, obviously it's trending up, so that's a good thing. But
Okay.
I would have concerns with this high level analysis.
Okay. And if I took one hand away, the hand that you left with would do what?
I would go for it.
Thank you. Patrick.
I would not. I think it would essentially be communicating a wrong message that you're potentially undermining your business or one of your core values for the sake of another. And I think if they are true to all three, then they need to invest for only the firms that can go outside.
You can talk about an explanation once you report. Eventually report it down. Like, how do you explain it?
And I think that's important for the seminar to reflect on also, is that asset management is just like any other business. So there's your current client and your next client. What is that going to do to build on this argument? By investing in a certain security and the company, your worst case scenario, and particularly as an ESG investor, is something goes wrong with that company. Yeah? And something always goes wrong with companies. So you've got to be very clear on your investment approach. You've got to set expectations correctly. But stuff's going to happen. Yeah. So that's a real constraint or a consideration, and in some ways why there are three parts to asset management. And even when you're trying to manage money and your PMs, they just want to say, leave me alone, I'm just trying to, it does impact on client relations. So for example, in emerging and frontier markets, particularly when they're smaller or concentrated, even New Zealand, right? Very sophisticated, developed market, very competitive. But if it's a small universe at the personal level, chances are you went to university with someone who's in the C-level suite of any kind of blue chip company. And it's what's very interesting to me is at the level of the institutional decision making and the perspective of the sell-side analyst or the PM, when it comes to making some of those decisions in a smaller market, these factors do come into play. So for example, think about investing. What did you see that was new for you today? Well, I hope you saw what is new for you today that you've never seen before. Is a fund manager based in an emerging market that's completely transparent about how it votes proxies. Yeah? Like, there's large parts of the UK, US, Europe that don't even have that level of clarity, and they're looking to roll it out around the world. Yeah? So just a reminder about world class coming from anywhere, that's what's happening in the 21st century. But being very clear and transparent about what they're looking to do would be one way to mitigate that danger. It's one of your worst case scenarios. Just when you go in, you've done your hard work, you've done your thesis, then you find out the CEO vaulted with $1 billion. What was the Satyam number? Who remembers Satyam? How much? Was it $1 billion? No? Oops. Okay, anyone else going in?
Oh.
No. Who's buying?
Quick question. When you're doing an ESG analysis and S and G is high and E is low, how do you go about this?
That's where kind of the thinking of the industry is being stretched right now. People have moved from the if to the how, now almost to the how much. So the relative trade-off between ESG and why do I like teaching with this case is because it presents that issue for you. Yeah. So access of electricity to poor or previously disadvantaged with a large E issue. And what I'd like to write, which ties into something else that I want to cover, we're into our last 10 minutes now. There's opportunity to write cases. If you go to sinclairconsult.com, on the Synco website, you can see there's a list of cases there. I spoke to some faculty earlier today. We got cases backed up, ready to be written. They'll be twice as hot as this generation case. And one case ready to be written is the World Bank last year funded Eskom, the major state-owned utility in South Africa, for 2 coal-fired generation plants, 3.7 billion US. 4 countries, 4 major countries, donor countries to the World Bank abstained from it. Diplomatically, that's as bad as voting against it. Okay? So there was, like, diplomatically, it was a big incident. It had people writing columns and opinion pieces in all the major papers. Why it's even more interesting than this case is because it had a big G element on account of the ruling political party has a funding institution called Chancellor House in South Africa. It had benefited with a 25% stake, I think, in the power generating units that were being sold to these actual power plants. So to answer your question, that is where in this space that the struggles are happening, weighing the E versus the S versus the D. And it'll differ from client to client. So if you, from investor to investor, so to get this many investors signed on to the statement, it's kind of an easy no-brainer. If you read this, this is a great diplomatic speak, okay? Basically, they're just promising you we should eat more, right? It doesn't say more sushi, more ice cream. You know, ice cream is on the food pyramid down the right. It's cut down the left. So it's quite easy to get X number of assets to sign on to this. It's much harder to get X number of assets to say, don't build these 2 power plants. That's very, very challenging. And part of the issues is how to balance that. So in this cases, we must explore that. Okay, guys, we've got to land in 8 minutes. How I'd like to summarize this. Is there anyone else who would like to express their opinion? I'm going to pick on anyone who I feel. Have you spoken? Would you please speak? Are you going to buy ABB India?
I haven't read this case in detail.
But you've listened to the erudite opinions of your colleagues.
Yes.
What would you like to do?
Well, I would agree with what Patrick said, that if they do invest in this coal-fired plant, ABB India, they're harming their own reputation for the future investments. So, from that perspective, no.
Thank you. I asked you to read that article. Would you offer what that article added?
So it's basically a cover story which talks about this new law in India.
So, a cover story on Mining Weekly. Okay, it was how recent? A couple of weeks ago.
November 4th, October 20th.
Okay. 2 weeks ago, it's about mining in India. Go.
So,
2 minutes.
Yeah, it basically talks about a new law in place which invites private investors to invest into the mining space in India. It basically is a middle of the road law. I mean, that's my own perception, which aims to please both the investors and also environmental activists and the local community. It basically says that 26% of the profits or the previous year's royalty, whichever is higher, needs to go to the local communities. And this is going to be over and above the regular tax and royalties which the companies pay to the local community. So that's pretty high, and that's why the companies are not keen on this particular law. The local tribes need to approve the mining agreements, and I mean, there are cases highlighted in over here, which talk about small states in India like Orissa, where local tribals had an issue with new mining proposals, and it talks about how those mining proposals did not work out. But this also does bring in new technology, and if you look at India, the mining scene in India more so, I mean, the local communities will be pretty hesitant because the way mining has been done till now, it's basically taking resources from a particular place and not giving back. So this at least talks about giving it back to the local community to an extent.
Good, thank you. Any other strong opinions that we haven't covered? Who hasn't spoken? What is your buy-sell decision?
I don't think I would buy. Basically, I disagree with a lot of the opinions that were already offered in terms of their own future investment. And I guess this goes along more with the first question you asked, but as an MEM, not an MBA, I wouldn't want to invest in anything that has to do with a coal power plant.
And do you feel comfortable taking this climate change proposal to the Duke Endowment? Is that where you land?
Sure.
Good. Who else hasn't offered an opinion in this whole class? There was a troublesome row. This row here. There's my trouble right there.
I would invest it just because that the other criteria that I value that originally in the beginning of the discussion I was with the girl in the row over there that I wouldn't invest in the coal power industry, but after everybody's argument I think I would invest that.
You would not?
I would.
You would?
Yes.
Okay. And next year?
I wouldn't.
You would not invest. Why?
In my personal choices. I wouldn't agree with investment.
Your personal preference, based on what?
Just
You're an investment professional.
right, but
Sorry guys, can you just keep it down? Thanks.
I wouldn't know.
Your personal preference, okay? We need to find more people like you with lots of money.
Yes.
You're just a guess, I know, but let's express your opinion. Go on.
My opinion is...
15 seconds, and
well,
why?
I didn't read, but I would invest.
Why?
They do a lot of research. They have looked at both the long-term and short-term aspects of it, and I would invest.
Okay, who else hasn't, sorry guys, I'll come back to you. Who else hasn't? You, sir.
I think
apologize for pointing, but there's no name change. Go ahead.
I think you have to, because if you want to sort of build the renewable energy projects in the future, a lot of them are going to be built with large corporations, large organizations that are doing sort of are in more of the dirty field.
Yes.
I think if you establish those relationships, you have a much better long-term potential effect than sort of using your idealism to only gain short-term benefits.
Okay, fair enough. In front of you.
I wouldn't, I think, because as somebody said, if it doesn't turn well, it probably gonna be very hard for them to make further investment. And I think the major, because the CEO or somebody thinks they're different from other investors, so in that case they won't be able to differentiate themselves with other investors.
Okay, good. 2 hands, go.
Yeah, I say no. I think it does match to their 3 core values, so they can still have a sustainable company themselves. They can still get outsized returns. They can still generate a lot of discussion about why they chose this investment in the S and not the E. But Al Gore is the public face of this company. He equals green, inconvenient truth. So, like you said, you turn off all the new money. I can invest in coal power plants without paying a salary to Al Gore.
Okay, thank you. There's another hand.
Well, here's a real MBA answer to you, which is defer to the experts in the room, and we're lucky to have two gentlemen here who have just published a lot of work on energy development. So I would ask their opinion.
So I will invest if I
How
have
should I pay you for that? You're just intermediary. I'm going to disintermediate you after this meeting. Thank you.
That's fine. I just want to know.
So I will invest, and I just went through the case. I have not been very thorough, but I noted a couple of points. First, this company is not in coal power production. It's like transmission and distribution of power generated, which can be from any source. If you can look at the Exhibit 8B, so you can see the revenue figures. Secondly,
counterpoint.
Yeah. Second.
But sorry, counterpoint. While you're distributing and transmitting, you know the majority of that is still.
Yeah. I'm coming to that point. So
go.
First, my reason is based on the point that my action is going to increase the carbon footprint of that country or not. If it is going to increase, I'm not going to invest. If it's going to decrease, I'm going to invest. So by making investment in a company which is the exhibit suggests that they are the best in managing transmission and distribution, they would be taking care of the transmission and distribution better than anyone else. That means less losses. So you are basically making the power more efficient. Third, the government is having a lot of plan to diversify their energy generation. The only concern the guy Ferguson has about that thing that a lot of production would happen through coal, but he's saying that the alternatives are still expensive. So there is still research going on. The chances are that in future that other sources will take prominence. I'm looking for long-term investment. I would better invest in a company which takes care of distribution and transmission through any power source. So that's another thing. Second, electricity can reduce the carbon footprint of many users who are using kerosene. So that's another argument. I am yet to have another data on that which is more carbon friendly. And second, as a stakeholder in the biggest power distribution company, I can influence the company policy to be more green rather than leaving somebody else. So that's my.
And how about ending with the Indian position at Copenhagen and the Copenhagen Protocol?
That would be like very. So we surely like we are. So Indian position is something like they are very guarded. They are concerned because their primary argument is that developed countries have already achieved a lot of things, and the new policies are going to restrict them to achieve that kind of growth. I'm not big thing. I think that growth can be achieved through greener measures. So I'm not highlighting the Indian way of thinking there.
Okay, but that is a very real consideration. Look, part of what we looked after through the seminar, again, you offered me only 4 hours to work with, some very rusty and unflashy brains. We've got you polished up towards the end. But it's putting it front and center. In many ways, I don't script them, and this is why they're colleagues and I respect them. The three voices that you had in the room today, live from the coalfront. Like, look at the issues that they're dealing with. Look at the investment products they're building. They've got assets managed today. Day jobs in this space. So one of your key takeaways is it's happening. Right? One key thing I want you to remember is environment, social, and governance factors are in investment decisions today. Whether you know what they are or you don't, that's a separate issue. Yeah? Try investing in a country that doesn't have rules of law around ownership. Try trading on a stock exchange that is effectively corrupt. So whether you're investing on the New York Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange, Shanghai, or Johannesburg, the Cairo and Alexandria Stock Exchange, there's rules of the game that you're playing with. So there's always been a price for carbon. It's just been negative. You could externalize the cost. There's always been a price for corporate governance. It was only paid by the people who actually owned the company when Mr. what have you took his cash withdrawal from Satya. There was a price. It was just external. So I haven't used the phrase good. I haven't used the phrase socially responsible. Those for me are kind of sub-themes within the whole sustainable investment space. In my lifetime, I'm just trying to figure out something that blew my mind in my first year of economics. I don't know if you recall this, Paul Samuelson's, the big red one. This concept of an externality. Because I live on one planet with more and more people. There are no externalities at a planet level. Yeah? So what am I trying to achieve? What I hope I open some of your minds to during the course of the seminar, give you a chance to roll up your sleeves, speak out, hear from some experts, think through frameworks. ESG is in every investment decision you make. My question to you is, how well do you understand that and what that impact would be? That's part of the reason why I threw in that opinion survey, is to start getting you thinking along those lines and to reflect back to me where you're coming from. Yeah? There's lots and lots of material I could have offered you. I'm here live in person. I said to Katie, why can't I just dial in from South Africa? She said, no, it won't work. It's a seminar. I've seen how you work. It works better in person. So I hope it's been worth my basically 60-hour return trip and my time away from my family. Okay? Enjoy your meals at home. Things cost. Right? I need a inspiring speech from Patriot or something. But I hope it's been helpful for you. Okay? I'm on the lookout for talent. I need next generation talent. I need people who are going to design their own asset management strategies, who are going to build their own asset management firms, who's going to think differently, working at big firms with big logos on the front door. And I'm looking for a few whistleblowers, the most respected and endangered species of all. I live at the very bottom of Africa, by choice. I stand here as a white African, which is challenging in itself. Give me a bottle of preferably good red wine, none of that Australian stuff, and I'll talk to you about it one day. We've all got our stories. My encouragement to you is in picking up some of Bill's thinking, think about how the world of opportunities looks in the next 10, 20, 50 years. Where are the assets? What are the drivers and barriers to integrating ESG factors in the way we manage those assets? And whether someone calls this ESG or something else, do you see the underlying demographic trends? Where the growth is going to come from, where the demand is going to come from, and some of those attitudes that people have. Whether it's going to be flashy events at the New York Stock Exchange, whether it's high-profile people, whether it's political entities, or whether it's people like you. If you look at some of the names involved, that's why. Talk to the Duke Endowment. Talk to North Carolina State Treasurer. They're just managing people's assets. Pension fund is nothing more than a whole lot of widows and orphans and workers' money stashed together. The largest pension fund, or the largest institutional asset manager in the US is made up of the pensions of teachers and firemen and policemen. Isn't that amazing? More than the Goldman Sachs and the dudes. And it's like, no. It's a whole lot of people doing an honest day's work, mostly, and saving up for retirement. They are the most influential. Those are the people who can allocate capital. Do we go this way or do we go that way? So one of your action items that could come out of today's seminar, you could all be pension fund trustees. Why not? You got a pretty expensive graduate education, I heard. It may or may not be good because the pre-MBA is kind of outshone a few of you. You've got a very expensive education. At a planetary level, you are very expensive. Over 7 billion people on the planet, heading towards 9 billion by 2050. How many people have the opportunities that you have to sharpen your brain, to expand your thinking, and to weigh up these issues? And if your voice doesn't speak from a position of information and analysis and logic, whose voice are we going to listen to? You are the few. You should have gone to the community college. Yeah, you wouldn't have had to handle this. It's a good thing. I'm mandating you to go. Take every skill you have and decide what direction we grow. What kind of leader will you be? And I hope 4 hours on this subject has helped you head in a certain direction. Because I'm trying to solve for this gentleman. I'm an investment guy. I love investments. I read analyst reports. One of the saddest things about leaving America was I no longer get the Wall Street Journal, even the European version. That's small. I get the Financial Times on a Sunday afternoon, but it's kind of like 2 days late. I'm an investment guy. How do I get capital to this man who woke up on this sunny morning, the sun always shines in Africa, and he chose not to rob and steal, not to be seduced by the drug of alcohol, like unfortunately so many people do. He got up and he met someone who stopped with a pickup truck with some fine manufactured goods that may or may not have come from an Asian destination on a cargo ship. And he said, how much can I sell these for? And as you can see, he's complied with all the environmental health and safety regulations that apply in the country. He has his reflective vest. No, you can see it clearly. He has his helmet. He has his stall, his barcode counter. He's monitoring everything. It gets sucked straight through his Cisco system and his SAP analytics. No. How do we get capital to people like this? I'm an investment guy. I know that every investment decision has ESG factors in it, integrated in it. I work with clients to try and figure out what those are and find smarter ways to invest. I hope you've enjoyed your seminar, and I hope you too one day may be one of the sustainable investment next generation. We need all the good people we can find. Thank you for your time.
Produced by Duke University, online at duke.edu.